Mr. Scare here, and today, I have some chilling camping horror stories from the deepest parts of the woods. But before I begin reading, hit the like button, and for regular horror stories, subscribe to Mr. Scare. We need like 10 more subscribers to reach 2,000. In 2014, my boyfriend and I went camping in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping over there was free, but with no cell service, barely a road, etc. On our trip, we did come across 2 other people there. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them anyway. The first was a woman who had driven her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past her. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. Usually, my boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said his time something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected that we would stop. And that was fishy. She wasn't worried or concerned. She knew people stop, and so would we. But to her surprise, we did not. And my boyfriend was already aware of such people. So he even teased her as we drove past. And she got pissed and started abusing me. But by the way she reacted, we could easily tell that her mission failed. And we were safe. We encountered the next person when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for dinner. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out that each time it was the same car. And the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was too muddy. And we wanted the driest site possible to make the most of the trip. Now we did speak about it and considered that the other car too could have been doing the same thing as we did. That is searching for a good spot to camp. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the several remaining hours before dark. No one else drove by. Whether or not those 2 had anything else to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m., we were awoken by this very loud noise. I am unable to describe it very well, or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the little tent's window, but couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated itself for another few times. My boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off, and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. I slept with discomfort but somehow managed to doze off eventually. After we left, he told me that it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper to me if the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We lay there for a while longer, when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed though before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hadn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous, that someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also half expected to find out the gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny hybrid commercial. For the rest of our trip, we only stayed in well-populated campsites or got a hotel. So just stay alert out camping. Ever since my friends and family got to know that I work in the forestry department, they want to know if I've ever seen the goat man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or rather, fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen to me. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't ever see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure I'm willing to chalk it up to the goat man. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hiked up to where she was found, and her husband was just beside her. He jogged to us and told us that he was a little way off the trail looking at something when his wife started screaming behind him. Upon hearing that, he ran back to her and found that she was passed out on the trail. We got her on a backboard, and as we were getting her down to the welcome center, she came back to her senses and started screaming again. I calmed her down and asked her what had happened. I can't remember the exact words that she said, but I'll tell you what happened. She'd been waiting for her husband to return to the trail when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part quite precisely, because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget it even if I tried.
It wasn't a cat. It was a man saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man, it couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him clearly. And the closer he got, the more scared I was, and the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I finally lost my senses and fainted.
Now we were all a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the damn woods, chanting meow at people. So once we got down the mountain, I told my superiors that I'm going to go search the area to see if I could find anything. He gives me permission to go, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone around, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back I go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I started to hear something in the distance. I stopped, and I called out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying meow in this really odd monotone. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sorts of fades out, and I ended up heading back to the welcome center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit it was weird. For the time that I have worked for and been a part of the search and rescue department, I'd say that about more than half of the calls that I get are related to people lost in their way. The other are rescue calls, people who fall down cliffs and hurt themselves, get injured by fire, or get bitten or stung by animals or insects. We're a tight team, and we have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases where we never find any trace of them so frustrating. One case, in particular, was very upsetting for all of us. Mainly because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. So an older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently, he had a history of getting seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Now even I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why his wife didn't go with him. And we don't ask about those kinds of things, because past a certain point, it really doesn't matter. All I knew was that someone is missing, and it was my job to find them. We went out in a standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our crew members found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a way to make sure that we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes over the radio telling us to all head back to his location, and we come right away, because this usually means the missing person is injured, and we need a full team to help get them out safely. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on the sides of his head. I asked my partner what was going on, and he pointed up toward the branches of this tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. Up there was a walking stick dangling from a branch, at least 20 to 30 feet off the ground. The little strap thing on the handle has been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we didn't see any other signs that he was still in the area. We called up into the tree, but it was quite obvious that no one was in it. We were all just sort of left scratching our heads. We kept searching for the guy, but we never found him. We even brought our canines out, but they lost their scent long before this tree. Eventually, the search is called off, because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point, there's not much that we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for a year, asking if we had found her husband or any new evidence, and it was heartbreaking to hear her get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call, in particular, was so upsetting, but I think it was just the sheer improbability of it. That and the questions that were raised. How the hell had this guy's cane ended up there? Did someone kill him and toss that up there like some weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it was almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. But we have never found the answer to these, and we probably never will. Now I am not a part of the forestry department, but I just happen to have a story related to it. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana and Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure that there are no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights. So we packed up all our gear in saddlebags or saddle bundles and started out on our quest. The first day and night were amazing. There was beautiful scenery all around and amazing air quality. It was just so peaceful out there. I love that area and wished I got an opportunity to go up there more often. It was all fine until we started out on the second day and my cousin said,
"Do you want to see something weird?"
Of course, I said yes, so she led me on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from the actual path we had laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to, but that kills the batteries quickly. I do, and literally out in the middle of nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10-gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally, I decided to follow the damn thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees, then back to the ground, then it snakes around rocks and finally dead ends into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-wood or plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing, just this outlet and this desk. I am staring confused as all hell at this desk in the middle of a forest when my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord, and plugs it into the outlet. That fucker then lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now, the place where we have had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around. And yet, there was a live outlet. It was weird as shit. And to this day, no one knows what it was doing there, or more importantly, who kept it there. One of my best friends from college was a geologist major who had ended up becoming a ranger in the southeastern part of the United States. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remember that about 8 to 9 years back, he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row and found out they were visiting from out west, and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot where they'd taken pictures of where he popped the question, but they were having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle and then hiked with them to where he thought that it would be. They found it, and he left them there and went back to his station at the entrance. He said that he got a weird feeling once he got back, and he felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. And once it came time to lock up at night, he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it, left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance, and went back to where he left them. He found both of them lying down spooning along the bank of the river. Neither was alive. He called the cops, went through the 9 yards, and went home. The police were able to disclose to him their identities, but weren't sure anything else initially. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they had both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical or pill combination medley. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged. My friend wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad about them dying, but said that he thought they hadn't asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think they helped to kill them. Out of all the stories I remember, there was one that was less spooky but sad for sure. A young man had gone missing late in winter, when really no one should have been going that far out onto the trails. We close a lot of such trails, but some remain open year-round unless there's a shitload of snow. We did an op for him, but we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground. It was an unusually heavy snow year. We knew that it wasn't likely that we'd find him until spring, by when it would be too late. Sure enough, when the spring arrived, a hiker reported a dead body that he spotted just a little way off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree, in a pile of melted snow. I knew right away what had happened, and it scared the living shit out of me. Most of you who ski or snowboard, or spend any amount of time on a mountain, will probably have guessed too. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in the areas beneath the branches. It happens most with fir trees, because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So what you end up with is a space around the base of a tree that's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells, and they're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We put up signs in the Welcome Center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are, but every year we get an unusual amount of snow. At least one person doesn't read them, or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find out about it in spring. My best guess is that this young man was hiking and got tired, or maybe had a cramp from walking in the deep snow. He went to go sit at the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell in. He must have got stuck with his feet up, and the surrounding snow caved in around him. Unable to free himself, he would have got suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position, as this guy did, even 5 or 6 feet of snow can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled. Upside down, in the freezing cold, he didn't die quickly. The snow would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening. I can't even imagine what he was thinking in his last moments. Thank you so much for listening to these stories, and we need like 30 more subscribers to become a horror community of 2,000 people. Let's get there quickly, and I'll see you in the next video. Also, you must check out my video on parking lot horror stories. I'm confident you would love listening to those stories. I am also working on horror stories from Montana and Wyoming.